So next, Missy's going to tell you about her off-grid accident.
Oh yeah, well I suppose I ought to tell you, oughtn't I? So look away and mute the sound now if you're at all squeamish, because we're going to talk a little bit about some gory things.
So in Portugal, fires are a big thing. It's been on the news. There's a lot of fires, hundreds of fires every year, sometimes 4 or 5 fires just in the local area around us.
So then the fire planes can't fly at night either. So that then just meant that we kept a really close eye on Fogos and they got it under control and it didn't affect us at all. We've had friends that had fires on their land or near their land and the bomberos went.
They're available. Antihistamines is a pretty important one with processionary caterpillars and scorpions. Welcome back to the Wildlands, and tonight's episode is sponsored by Missy's thumb.
Today we're going to talk about accidents and emergencies while you're living off-grid.
Find out later what exactly has Missy done to her thumb off-grid.
Of course, not everybody who lives off-grid actually lives very far away from a hospital. In fact, we're only 20 minutes away from the nearest town, which has an A&E, lots of doctors, health centres and so on. So that's not necessarily the main thing you have to think about. Is when you think about people living off-grid, you might think about them being off in the wilderness, miles and miles from help. And so we're just going to talk about some of the things that we've had to consider and take into our thoughts when we moved out here in this Portuguese wilderness.
So worth pointing out for those of you that are new to the channel, we've been living off-grid for 3 years and we're coming into our 4th year. And Missy's thumb is the first time we've actually needed to go to A&E in that 3 years.
So even if you don't live a million miles away from a hospital, it's still worth being prepared and informed. A good rule of thumb is to never do anything dangerous, never work on anything dangerous while you're on your own. We don't tend to have much in the way of dangerous work on the wildlands anyway, and we tend to do any jobs like that together. If you happen to be chopping down a tree or something like that, we're always both there. But something that springs to my mind is the fact that when you walk down our land, it's quite a long way, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It takes you 5-10 minutes to get down to the bottom there, and on the way there's slippery slopes and big boulders. There may be wild boar out there,
snakes,
snakes,
yeah.
There's all sorts. And while you're off down there, when we were first on the land, I didn't think twice about it. You'd go off and you'd be able to come back up. It's no big deal, is it?
Nope.
You know, if you trip over, you'd still be able to get back up top. But then I thought, well, what happens if you can't? Because if Dom was down the hill and he tripped, and just tripped like anybody could, wherever they live in the world, tripped over a rock and maybe he fractured something or, you know, sprained something. If he shouts, I probably won't hear him from up here because it's far enough away that you wouldn't hear that. That then made us realise that we need to have walkie-talkies. So we have a pair of those. Dom takes one, I have one, and it's just in case, isn't it?
And sometimes I go back to the UK with Rosie for a few days here and there to visit my mum and see family. And on those times, you make sure that you've always got access to your phone and that you've got a signal, so that if you had an accident while you were on your own, you could contact me, I could get hold of friends, or maybe you could contact friends and so on.
Yeah, we always let people, our friends and our neighbours, know if I'm going to be on my own on the land. And as you say, I always have my phone and it doesn't get data, so I've got my Wi-Fi box with me and I take it everywhere I go on the whole land. I also have a little tiny first aid kit on me wherever I go, and my knife, you know, got to be prepared. That's the theme of this whole video, is being prepared. So the walkie-talkies are great. They can reach a really wide distance. We can hear each other clear as a bell. Yep. They've got a multitude of functions on them. This is not sponsored by the walkie-talkie company. I just think that they're a really, really good addition to have. They cost us 100 quid, I think, from a local tech shop. And they're Motorola ones, and they've got a clip, they clip on your belt, and you can press a button and it does a really loud like alarm call in case he's not able to hear me. Sometimes he's down at the pump and I need to call him about something. I press that and he can hear it. So I just think that's really handy. Yeah,
and we use them with Rosie as well. So if we're going off further down the land and she's staying at the top, then we leave a walkie-talkie with her. So
or when she goes out foraging, she takes one with her, and then she can contact us, and we don't have to rely on phone calls or anything. You literally just press a button, you talk, and you've got instant contact. So that's great and highly recommended.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing that I came across online, we don't have one, but somebody recommended having an SOS satellite beacon. Now that looks like a walkie-talkie, but it's smaller. They do really mini versions these days. Usually the item costs about £400, and then you have to pay a monthly subscription as well. They're usually used by hikers or mountaineers, people that go really off into the wilderness. And it's better than a phone. It can get satellite signal when phones can't. You can use it has very basic text functions. So if you needed help, you could text your family and it sends them a GPS coordinate telling your family exactly where you are, and they can get the text, and it tracks you through trees or open. It sounds really, really cool. And I just thought it might be handy if you lived out here. Maybe if I lived on my own, I would have one, because if I tripped and fell and broke my leg and I couldn't get signal on my phone, or I lost it or something, if I have this thing with me, I can press a button and I'll get emergency service help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at times there was a period quite recently where we, apart from going into town to do our shopping, we didn't see anybody for a month. So a lot can happen in a month if you've ever had an accident, particularly if you're on your own.
Yeah.
So yeah, those kind of satellite beacons for if you're very remote, or if you're on your own, or maybe not, or obviously hiking and so on, very useful.
Yeah. Another good idea for you is to have your location, your actual coordinates, written down or saved on your phone or something like that, so that they're easily accessible. So if you do need to call somebody for help or an ambulance or what have you, you don't have to spend time looking it up on your maps.
In Portugal, that's a very good idea, because the emergency services don't use apps like What 3 Words. So if you needed to call the fire brigade or the ambulance to come out off grid, and you haven't got your coordinates handy and you've had an accident, maybe you can't actually then easily find them. So I've got like a text with the simple instructions of how to find the entrance to our first track from the main road, and then how to find our property from the second pin. I have that, I can cut and...
I have it too.
Yep.
So you can literally just
Paste
forward
it
it
in,
to
yep.
whoever you need
Yep.
to send it to
Yep.
really quickly. Another thing is to know your neighbours. We know our neighbours, everybody that's closest to us. The nearest neighbours are a 10-minute walk away, but we still know them. We made friends with them. We're friends with everybody sort of in a little radius around us.
We have everyone's number.
And we've got friends who live further away as well, sort of a half-an-hour drive away. And so you need to know who you can call if you need to call somebody. So if you've had an accident and you can't drive yourself to A&E, if that's where you need to go, then you've got to be able to call somebody, and then also to let them know that they can call you. So all of our neighbours, who are now basically all our friends, they know that if they need something, they can call us, and we'll be able to, one of us in the circle will be able to spring in to help.
Yeah, and it sounds very simple and very obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people haven't prepared for those sorts of eventualities. And
it's just having a little conversation, isn't
yeah.
it, with your friends? Instead of just assuming that you could call them, just say, hey, if ever there was a big accident or emergency, is it all right if I contact you? They're bound to say, yeah, that's fine, you can, as long as we can contact you. And it's just having the conversation so that everybody's aware of it.
So yeah, talking about injury and illness, it's always very prudent and wise to have a comprehensive and very good first aid kit with all kinds of bits and bobs in. We've got quite a large one, the sort of thing that you'd have in a small business in the UK that you would have to have by law, that kind of thing. So it's got all kinds of bandages and all kinds of things for doing makeshift stitches and everything you need first aid wide. So it's worth having a nice big proper set that you
I would add on to that it should be accessible. It doesn't want to be at the back of a cupboard or tucked away, and everybody in your family should know where it is, even little ones who, even if they can't do the first aid, that's fine, but they should know if you shout to them, can you get mama the first aid kit, they can go off and get it for you and bring it to wherever you are.
Yeah, and again, it's the same as the last point. It's just worth having a good one, knowing where it is, everybody knowing where it is, accessible, so that when you have an accident, you haven't got to worry about finding the kit.
Yeah. I'd add on that you should have a little stock of the usual medicines. It's just, I think sometimes you might need something and you think that you can just pop into town and get it if you need it, hay fever medicine or whatever it might be, but it's just prudent to have it in, because you never know when you might not be able to leave. Maybe it's in the case of a fire nearby or something like that and the roads are shut. Maybe your car's broken down the day that you happen to get the flu. It's just sensible, isn't it? We've got backups of our backups. And it doesn't matter if that's antihistamine ointments and medications from the pharmacist, or yarrow powder and homeopathic remedies, whatever it is that you know that you're going to need to use. make sure that you've got a decent stock of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's particularly relevant when you're off-grid, because you maybe have to travel quite some time to go and buy them. So you might as well buy a big stock, keep everything in stock so that when you need it, it's there available. Antihistamines is a pretty important one with processionary caterpillars and scorpions and
all
so
sorts
on.
of bites and stings,
Yeah.
even the mosquitoes and so on. Maybe you might want to consider taking a first aid course as well. Again, if you're living further away from A&E, if you sort of an hour or so or further away, then it's probably more prudent to know your first aid and know how to do certain things instead of relying on being able to get to A&E, knowing what you're capable of. I used to be a Girl Guiding leader, so I've actually taken multiple first aid courses, and I feel really confident with being able to address different wounds, but also knowing when you're beaten, as it were. And my accident with my thumb, I thought, as soon as I first did it, I thought, yeah, okay, we got the first aid kit out, and I got out the sterile swabs and knew what I was doing, and then I went, actually, that's a bit big and a bit deep and a bit scary, and I think it needs to be seen by A&E. So then we went.
Yeah, and sometimes, particularly off-grid, you may be in a situation where you can't get to A&E quickly, so then you might need to know how to make an emergency splint and stop a much bigger wound from bleeding so that you can then get to A&E or wait for an ambulance to come here and so on.
I find just having the knowledge and knowing that I've been on the courses means that I feel really confident with going into accidents. When we were on van life and the bungee caught you by the eye, we had all this stuff and I felt really fine going and taking care of it. So.
And a lot of the injuries that we get are generally, we get them all the time, sometimes all day long. They're usually stick injuries, so you're walking around and a stick pokes you in the ankle and you start a small wound. So all those kind of things, it's worth having your basic plasters and all that kind of thing. We get through lots of plasters.
We do, yeah. Yeah, you're right, we are always being injured, but it's always little things. For 3 years it's been always little things that we're perfectly capable of taking care of.
So prepare for the eventuality of when it's not a little thing.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Oh, and ice packs. Having ice packs in the freezer, all year round, that can be a real godsend.
Yeah, another example of an injury that didn't require treatment but could have been quite unpleasant was last week. I was putting the height barrier on our gate, and when I got to the end of the bolt, the drill spun round and smacked me in the face, and it was about 1 millimetre from my eye.
And it gave you a good old clonk, didn't it, on the temple?
Gave me a massive clonk. Could have been quite unpleasant. Ice pack came out, and I think that saved the day, really. I had a big bruise for about a week.
Yeah.
But that's another example. Could have been more serious. Wasn't, thankfully. And
it's not so, I mean, the obvious thing to say in a video like this is don't do stupid stuff. But we're not. We're not reckless, are we? We don't do stupid stuff. It's the accidents are always stupid because all you were doing was drilling in a bolt.
Yeah, or it's, you're walking down a hill, which I've done also in the last few weeks, and you slip on the gravel and you go down backwards. Most of the time you just fall over and get up and swear a lot and you carry on. Maybe one day you might do your back in, or you might hit your head on a rock or what have you.
Yeah. Another thing I've just thought of is you should know about your local hospitals. You should know how the distance, how long it's going to take you to get there, so that you can be prepared for that, and know the actual location.
Yep.
You need to know that you can drive without having to faff with GPS and whatnot, exactly how to get there without driving all around town and getting lost, because you're likely going to be in a panic situation. So I think that's that for injuries and illnesses. Moving on to fires, emergencies.
So in Portugal, fires are a big thing. It's been on the news. There's a lot of fires, hundreds of fires every year, sometimes 4 or 5 fires just in the local area around us. You need to be prepared for fires in many, many ways. So firstly, relevant to Portugal, there is an app called fogos.pt, and if you're in other countries in Europe that are prone to many forest fires or wildfires, there's bound to be an app or
Fireguard.
Fireguard. There we go. So we have an app and it sends us notifications of any fires in our district, which is Castelo Branco district, and then you can check how close it is and whether you need to be concerned and whether you need to take action and or prepare to evacuate. And then that brings about other factors to think about. How do you evacuate your animals if you're farming? If you have chickens, ducks, goats, sheep, what are you going to do about them?
You should have a plan. Think about it. If you're living in an area where there are wildfires, you've got to have a plan straight off. How would I deal with a fire if it was immediate? What would we do if we had to evacuate? Like you say, we've got chickens. We need some way of getting all those chickens off the land with our 3 cats and 2 dogs.
Are there other things that you can do when you know there's a fire in your vicinity that could potentially come to your land without risking yourself? Can you take any actions? First off, that might be In our case, we could start the pump by our reservoir, and we could pump 50,000 litres of water over our cabin and or van and in the area that we live, providing we could do that safely and with enough time before any risk of fire came here, and then we could evacuate, and that may protect some of our property from a fire if it then made it onto our land.
Yes. Having small water sprayers. A friend of ours told us about a fire that was very close. It was a big fire, it was very close to his land. But the fire that actually came up on him was the fire that creeps along the ground and just smoulders the grass. And he had just a standard garden pump about this big, and you pump it up yourself and then you spray the ground, and that was enough to keep the fire at bay until the fire engines could arrive, which I thought was very worth knowing. So we've got a couple of those sprayers tucked away on the land, just ready for emergencies, filled with water, ready to go. You could also have buckets of sand for smaller fires on your own land. You know, if something has started accidentally. Obviously we're prepared for kitchen fires, we've got extinguishers and fire blankets and so on, because really the key, if it's starting on your land or started by you somehow, is just to get it out as fast as you possibly can.
Yep. So if you're living in Portugal and you're living off-grid as we are, and you're out in the rural sticks, maybe a long way from other people, it's always wise to make sure, even if you are off-grid and you're trying to escape from things, that the local junta know that you are on that land, so that they can inform the bomberos, who are the fire brigade, so that if there was a fire in your area, they know that there's somebody living there, and then they can put that as a priority action to come and save you should you require being saved. And
they do. We've seen, we've had friends that had fires on their land or near their land, and the bomberos went and into this off-grid property that's not, you know, it doesn't really technically exist anywhere, and yet the bomberos go there and they take care of you and they spray down your house or your land and make sure you get safe, which I find amazing and really great.
So in our case, the GNR, being the police, and the bomberos and the local mayor know we're here, and the GNR and the bomberos have been on our land, so we're in the radar. Should there be a fire near us, they would know that we're here.
Yep, that makes us feel safe. We also, during the peak fire months, obviously right in the middle of summer, we keep an eye most days on Phogos just to check it out and see what else is there, even if we hadn't had a notification, just to see what else is in the area. If something's looking like it might turn our way, you can then look up on a weather app. I use Windy to see what direction the wind's blowing in. Because we had a fire last year, it was fairly near us, but we didn't have to evacuate, but the wind was blowing directly in our direction and very fast, and it was heading into night time, so then the fire planes can't fly at night either. So that then just meant that we kept a really close eye on Phogos, and they got it under control, and it didn't affect us at all. But it's really good to feel prepared and safe in that way.
And the other positive thing is the off-grid community, much like many communities, is quite close-knit and communicates fairly well. So we do have local WhatsApp groups that cover different areas of off-grid living in this area, and people post particularly things to do with things like fire. There's a fire near me, they take video, they look at where, you know, what the movement of the fire, so sometimes you can get more accurate information or more localized information other than Phogos, so that you know whether you need to be thinking, is there potentially a problem that there's a fire coming to my area or my property? Yeah,
it gives you real peace of mind. The bomberos, we found in England, I've only ever seen fire trucks that look like a bog standard fire engine, like you'd see in a kid's picture book. And out here, they have different types. They have those standard fire engines, but they also have ones that are a bit stumpier, have big water carriers on the back, and they've got great big thick tyres, and they are specifically designed to be able to go through woodland and to go off-roading. They bump up the sides of mountains, they don't even need a track, so that's really good to know that they can do that. And they've got lots of fire planes here as well.
And it's worth pointing out that the majority, and I'm generalising here, certainly a lot of the fires in Portugal and other countries like Portugal are in plantation areas, so that is area of non-native woodland, usually grown for things like toilet paper or paper manufacture, so that's often pine trees or eucalyptus trees, both of which burn out of control quite often, and these are hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles of the same tree in rows that tend to generally be one of the main sources of fire. So for us, we're not actually near a plantation as such. So although we're in woodland, we have a lot of deciduous trees here, which actually help prevent fires in some ways in many cases. So we're in olive groves, we've got a lot of oaks, haven't we?
And there's a lot of towns nearby,
Yep.
which, or it's not going to prevent a fire or anything like that, but it does mean that when there's a fire in the kind of vicinity, they seem to jump on top of it really fast, don't they?
Yep.
They send lots of fire engines. It seems like overkill when you see they've got, you know, like 50 fire engines and 7 planes, but it means that it doesn't, instead of sending a few and slowly putting the fire out, they just squash it straight away.
Yeah. And it is unbelievably fast how they react here.
Yeah.
So when we were in England and you hear about a fire, say you're in Aylesbury where we came from, and somebody had a fire in their roof, you get 2 or 3 fire engines. If, you know, if needed, maybe it was only 1 fire engine. Here, sometimes you look at a fire and there's 1,200 firefighters and 300 fire engines and 25 fire planes.
Yeah.
And they're just going. And sometimes it's out within an hour. Sometimes if it's a huge fire, it can be a few days. And that's the beauty of things like Phogos as the app, because you can keep a record. You can see how many fire people are fighting on the fire and how it's going.
Yeah, very handy. Another thing to mention, I think, while we're talking about this, and we mentioned evacuation and being prepared with your pets and so on, is to keep all of your valuable documents in one place, in a folder, and know exactly where it is at all times, so that should you need to evacuate, you're gonna have a minute or 2, if not slightly longer, to grab what you need to grab. So I know where we've got a folder and it's got all our insurance documents, our documents from when we were going through visas and stuff like that. It's got marriage certificates, anything like that, and maybe your passports too, and you keep it in there and you can just grab your folder and go without having to panic about leaving them behind.
And it is a different culture here, because in the UK you're not required by law to have any papers saying who you are on you, whereas here it is law, so you need to make sure you have those with you so that they don't burn in any impending fire.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could get it replaced, but it would be a long process, and it's so much easier. In fact, what you could do, it's just occurred to me, I'm sure the preppers out there already know this one, you could make copies, couldn't you? And you could keep the folder of the copies in your car, and it's always ready to go.
Yeah. So if you were coming out to live off-grid and you're buying land, you've got 2 scenarios, putting it simply. Scenario number 1 is you're a UK resident and you're buying land that you come and visit sometime, maybe in your 90s Schengen days, but you don't live here. So in that example, you'd need the EHIT card or its equivalent, and I put a website address down the bottom should you need to organise one of those for your travels in the EU. And the second option is, like us, your residents, and then when you become a resident you need to register with the local health service so that you get a health number.
SNS number they call it here.
So we hadn't actually done that. We've been talking about it for ages. We talk about a lot of things for ages before we get round to them. So when Missy had her injury, which we'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, we didn't have those numbers. So when she went to hospital, she got into trouble. But luckily we had EHIT cards still that were valid, and we had our passports, so they treated her. And now you went and got those SNS numbers,
Actually,
didn't you?
it was A&E were okay. They were pretty cool, because I think because it's an emergency. So they said, do you have a health number? I said, oh no. They said, do you have an EHIT card? I said, well, not on me, it's with my husband. And they just let me be treated anyway. There was no problem. So when I went to the health centre, where the receptionist was a little bit of a battle axe, and she was rolling her eyes at me, which is fair enough, because I didn't speak good enough Portuguese to be able to have a proper conversation with her about it. I didn't have any of the paperwork that she wanted. And when she sent me to come back with it the next day, I still didn't have everything that she needed. So she was a bit grumpy. But I still got seen, and they were still very nice. The nurse was lovely, so.
So next, Miss is going to tell you about her off-grid accident.
Oh yeah, well I suppose I ought to tell you, oughtn't I? So look away and mute the sound now if you're at all squeamish, because we're going to talk a little bit about some gory things. It looks like this horrendous thing. What I've done is I've taken a chunk out of the side of my thumb. It's quite large, and it's not like a cut where I could have basically stuck it back together again, put plaster over it. It's just missing. So it was quite scary, and I went and I got the first aid kit. First thing I did was, oh my gosh, that's a lot of blood. So I went and sat down, got the first aid kit, and put a sort of swab on it and tried to stop the bleeding. Then I thought, oh, I need an ice pack. So I ran off to the freezer and got an ice pack. And then I thought, actually, no, probably I need to do something about this thumb that's still bleeding lots. So then I called Dom, because I felt a little bit like I was going into shock. You know, when you sort of get a bit dizzy and everything goes a bit, ooh. So then Dom came over and he was hunting through the first aid kit, trying to find things that we thought we needed. And then I realised that actually it was an A&E job and it was just really big. It wasn't from, I feel really silly saying this now, it wasn't even an off-grid accident. I wasn't chopping wood, I wasn't building, I wasn't using power tools. What I was doing was making a ratatouille for our dinner, and I was all excited because I got vegetables from our garden to make this ratatouille. So I got out my mandolin, which has a very sharp blade, and it's got a little thing that you use to hold your vegetable so that you slice it like this, and you get nice thin slices.
You know what's coming, don't you?
Did I use the special little thing for holding it? No, not me. So I'm holding my courgette like this, and I went, and on the third or fourth chuk, I realised that there was some weird sensation on my thumb, and I looked, and there was a bit of my thumb gone. So I did not finish making my ratatouille. I'll end up going to hospital. But there's more to this story, because could you take me to hospital all prepared? See, I don't drive and Dom does, so we have plans for if he hurts himself and I can't drive him. But you couldn't drive me either, could you?
I could not, no. So ironically, we'd just been on a reboot, so I hadn't had any alcohol for a month. And I think this was the first day where the reboot had ended, so I thought, oh, I'll have a couple of beers. So I hadn't had many beers, I think I'd had 3 beers.
Over the course of an afternoon?
Over an afternoon sitting by the pool, hard life off grid. So I debated, it's an emergency, should I drive? I felt okay, but I thought I can't really justify driving on 3 pints. So I had to phone a friend and that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the video, to be prepared. So we rang a friend and they were here within 10 minutes, took Missy to hospital. But also worth digressing slightly back to the mandolin and saying, Missy said, just in case they can sew it back on, go and have a look at the mandolin. So there was actually the end of Missy's thumb neatly sliced in the mandolin.
This is a bit gruesome, isn't it? We're going to have to put a little warning up before we start talking about the thumb for squeamish.
So I put that in a bag with some ice for you to take to hospital.
They told me to throw it away.
And they did,
They didn't put that on it. So if you're interested in the last little bit of the squeamish story, they were very nice. They cleaned it and they wrapped it really thoroughly, and it was out like this. It was like cartoon. It was
huge, wasn't it?
And I've since been back twice for them to change my dressings. They're going to do it once more, and then I think after that, maybe not many more times.
Hopefully,
so it feels like it's healing. For the first 3 days, they told me to take, and this was the other thing, they didn't give me any medicines or anything, which I thought was interesting. No antibiotics, even though it's quite a big injury. They literally just said, treat it with ice, which was daft because you can't get the ice, cold of the ice through the bandage, and painkillers. They said, do you have any painkillers? And I thought they meant like serious industrial ones. I went, oh no. She went, oh, Nurofen. Oh, okay. So I went home and took some Nurofen. But it was fine. And it's irritating now. It gets in the way. It's my right thumb. I can't scroll on my phone.
That was worrying, wasn't it?
Has got me out doing the washing up for a whole week though, so.
Yay.
But the plan came through, didn't it?
Yep.
So that's really cool. I very much hope that we can repay the favour if any of our neighbours need help, emergency help, and driving somewhere, or in fact, a friend of ours got stung by a scorpion and we were able to provide the painkillers for them that they didn't have. So stuff like that.
Yeah, they phoned us and we had the painkillers they needed, and they treated themselves for the unpleasant scorpion bite. Yeah, it's not something you have to worry about in Aylesbury, is it, scorpions?
No. A little brief aside, there's not much for us to tell you about here, but I felt I should mention earthquakes, because there was very recently, a few days ago, an earthquake just off the coast of Lisbon, and it was magnitude 5.7, and the shudders were felt here in our area. We saw somebody locally who had some buildings destroyed and shaken apart because of it, but it happened at 5:10 in the morning and we were asleep in our comfy van, so we probably wouldn't have felt anything. But obviously we've given you all the things to be aware of and considerate of when you're living where we're living. But there are other things. There's floods and tsunamis and all sorts. Yeah,
floods is interesting because for us we won't need to think about floods because we're at the top of a valley, and it's not something that traditionally happens. Maybe at the bottom of the valley at some point there could be a flood, but there's not enough water. So last year there were lots of floods. Particularly it was on the news for the places like Lisbon that had cars washing away and so on, but we have friends who had massive floods, had buildings partly washed away and reservoirs damaged and so on and so forth. So again,
that might just be something, if it's going to happen to you on your property, you need to be aware when you're buying your property. First of all, can I get signal from a phone, because that's quite key, and then what things might affect me here. Is it earthquakes? Is it floods? Is it tsunamis? Is it fires? You know, and when we first moved to Portugal, and I've seen other people doing it too, we were like, oh, where's the fire scary areas so that I know not to go there? And really, it's the whole of Portugal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I see them in Lisbon and down in the Algarve and up in the mountains. So Portugal just generally is fire risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think foreigners such as ourselves, when we moved, or we were looking to move to Portugal, you are subscribers, a lot of the comments, many comments about, is it in the fire area? Which implied that there were areas that weren't in the fire area. And as English people, we had that viewpoint too. We'll go somewhere where there aren't any fires, but as it happens, if you live in Portugal, when you look at the fire map of the risk, it's like maroon for like 3 months of the year, where everywhere is at risk of fire.
Yeah. So thanks very much for watching. Hope you all found that very interesting or useful bits of knowledge.
And if you're living off-grid or homesteading and you've had an accident, or advice of other things that we could do to minimise the risk of accidents and or how to deal with them off-grid, do pop them in a comment down below.
Absolutely. If you've had an accident or an emergency, tell us how you dealt with it and how did it go, and definitely give everybody some more ideas. We could compile it all together at the end.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you very soon from the wildlands.
Off-grid?
I'll do that again.
Yeah, all right.
So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you very soon from the wildlands.
Bye.